Hey, what's up, guys? It's Data Soccer TV, and we're back for another World Cup episode. Today, we are previewing the USMNT. We've done every single team in Group B so far. We even talked about Wales, Scotland, and Ukraine. And joining me today, I have a very valid source. It's been on my channel before. I visited him in London last month. You're really in a residential area. It's Jake?
Brian?
Dude, what? What are you doing here, man?
I live here.
That's right, you do live here. Do you want to go on the tour with us?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it? Yeah, let's do it, man. Yeah,
I mean,
we have Jake from FIFAmerica. Jake, how's it going, man?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be the USMNT representative.
No, I mean, it's been in the cards, it's been in the works, and this episode I'm looking forward to. So we're previewing every single team, Jake, as you know, and now it's time to talk about the United States men's national team. And this is going to lead all the way up into the World Cup. So if you're interested in this content, if you want to hear about every single team in this November's World Cup, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button. Let's go for 100 likes on this video. I know you guys are looking forward to this preview. So let's get started, Jake. Let's talk about the World Cup history for the U.S. Kind of really, and this episode is also for individuals who might not be familiar with the United States history. So we know what 1934 was the first World Cup that they were in, correct?
Yep.
And since then, it's kind of been hit or miss. And we know that from 1950 to 1990, they were not in the World Cup. And then from 1990 to 2014 consecutively. And then 2018, they missed the World Cup. So your emotions going into November, Jake, just your raw emotions when you saw that the United States men's national team qualified.
This is going to be different probably from other fans. And again, honored to be the USMNT representative because there's a lot of great people that could have spoken on the topic. Personally, for me, it was just a relief almost, I would say. Okay. Like they didn't necessarily meet my expectations in qualifying. And at the same time, the night that we lost to Trinidad and Tobago and didn't qualify for the 2018 World Cup, there's maybe a handful of times I've ever felt that pit in my stomach before.
Yeah.
So at some point, I kind of got over the fact that I'd rather just not feel that way, even if I'm a little disappointed in how we got there. At least we got there. And because we have such a young and inexperienced team, we probably should have expected a bit more inconsistency. Mm-hmm. And just getting to the World Cup, giving them some experience going into 2026. So you talked a little bit about the history, but I think the look ahead is really exciting for the US as well. We will be hosting with Canada and Mexico in 2026. So to get our team, which is full of really young players, 24, 23-year-olds that are Champions League level quality already, that is just the most important piece to me. So I'm relieved. I'm a little disappointed in how we got there, but overall, I'm very happy to see us back in, and the group itself is super interesting as well.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about the Group B later on in this episode. I completely agree with you. I was disappointed, especially with how qualifications ended. The process, I think that it was a lot of ups and downs, which of course you expect in CONCACAF. They did secure qualification, but at the same time, right now, we're kind of in a weird spot, aren't we, with some of the injuries here with the U.S. men's national team. We saw the last couple of matches of qualification, not necessarily a full roster, some question marks surrounding this U.S. team. And let's talk a little bit about that, because we kind of know the history of the World Cup with the United States men's national team. But as far as just their general quality, I want to talk a little bit about how much that drops off if there are injuries with some of these key players.
Sure. I mean, this year in general has been weird, to say the least. The U.S. has had a smattering of not just injuries, but long-term injuries, recurring injuries, and injuries that are happening to some of our best players. We have not seen a game for the U.S. team where Serginho Dest, Tyler Adams, Gio Reyna, Weston McKennie, and Christian Pulisic have all been healthy at the same time. And I would say those are kind of our top 5 or 6 players to be able to build some chemistry going into the World Cup. So in a weird way, like this, again, a little disappointed in how we got there, but the fact that we did that with so many of our key players injured, having the players kind of step up and step into that next player mentality that's something they talk about a lot. Like when you hear Greg do his post-game press conferences or even pre-game, just talking about how all of the players need to be ready to step up. I think in that sense, we actually did quite well this season, just because of we had, it must have been one of the worst years, one of the worst 12 months that a national team has ever had with injuries. So in a weird way, like having the World Cup in the winter, allowing some of those players that have been injured for a long time. I think about Gio Reyna. I think about Serginho Dest, who has had a lot of injuries. Even players that maybe aren't in form. So someone like Ricardo Pepi, who's an 18-year-old, or I guess 19 now, starting striker for the U.S., hasn't really found his feet in Augsburg. So I would say it's kind of been like an injury and form issue for the U.S. So having that World Cup in the winter, allowing us some time to really get healthy and get ingrained in our teams again, I actually think that's going to be a huge help to the U.S.
It's scary to think if the World Cup was actually in July. That would, in a usual calendar, we'd only be, a couple months away, which is wild to me. So I know everyone's complaining about the November World Cup, but you're correct. It's benefiting the U.S. at this point, as long as these players can remain healthy or get healthy over the summer. Let's talk a little bit about, I saw you did an episode on, Jake, on like kind of the U.S. men's national team health, or if there's a curse. Talk a little bit about that. Why are all these injuries happening? I mean, do you think it just comes with, young players playing multiple matches? Is it just bad luck? Is it a little bit of both?
Personally, and I am not a doctor, so I cannot speak on this with, maybe we'll have your dad come on at some point, Dr. McDonough. But I think for me, there's kind of there's too many that happened this season to the U.S. specifically at so many different club teams and club levels that I'm just going to say that this was a spectacular year in the dictionary definition for the U.S. in terms of injuries. I mean spectacular in the sense that this is an anomaly that will not happen again to any other national team for a long time. It just rings of something that should have never happened, was against all odds, that we had so many players, so many of our key players out with injury. And I think a lot of them as well, probably something to do with COVID having a really condensed schedule for the last 2 or 3 years. A lot of those players have not had a full off season to let their bodies rest. And then I think one other probably principle of this is for players like Gio Reyna that tried to come back and then got re-injured. I would imagine that in their minds, they were really trying as hard as they could to get back into fitness so that they could be a part of a World Cup qualification and start to build some form towards the World Cup and start to build some chemistry with their U.S. teammates. That probably had something to do with coming back a little too soon and risking re-injury.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. And the one player that went down recently is Miles Robinson, Atlanta United's defender. Talk a little bit about that. I know there's some controversy building whether or not John Brooks is going to be called in. I saw the stats that indicated that Brooks was the most consistent Bundesliga player, USMNT Bundesliga player this season. Do you think we will now see John Brooks phased back in, or is that to be seen with Miles Robinson's injury?
It's funny. I just had a conversation with Meg Swanek, who is a reporter for the U.S. Soccer team, and I actually asked her the same question. And because she's a little bit closer, I'm just going to kind of regurgitate
that's fine.
what she had talked about, which I completely agree with. Is basically my question was, because we knew before this June window that Greg was essentially saying he knows what John Brooks is like. He doesn't need to see him again until the World Cup to decide if he's going to be the right player for the squad. Now, those comments were made before Miles Robinson was injured. So it was more of a question of, does this open up an opportunity for John Brooks to be called back into the team? And essentially the answer is no. I think we all kind of expect that for June. Once Greg makes a comment like that essentially closes the door to a player and a window, Greg is not necessarily the type of person to open that back up and allow someone back in. I think his move this summer, he played his last game for Wolfsburg. It's been confirmed by the Wolfsburg team.
Yes.
He's going to be a free agent. So depending on where he lands, depending on what form he's in, like, to me, The only way that he gets called into the World Cup at this point is if we have more injuries at the center back position, or he is in blistering form. Like, Greg cannot say no to him.
Yeah.
And by blistering, I mean like he's over and above producing better than any center back in whatever league he's playing in. Otherwise, I think we all just have to get comfortable with John Brooks not being a part of the squad, even though, like, at my core, I know that John Brooks is one of the top 3 center backs for the US team. He's just not going to be a part of the squad going forward.
He's also, I believe he'd be the only starter to have World Cup experience as well. So
yeah, him, DeAndre Yedlin.
DeAndre Yedlin's one, if he starts.
Actually said this, like, if we want World Cup scorers on the squad, it's essentially John Brooks and Julian Green.
Julian Green,
are the only other active players that we could call in.
Which is interesting because we talked about missing the 2018 World Cup. It's not even like there'd be that many active players from that World Cup on this squad. And that's what I think the Group B viewers or individuals who are tuning in who don't know much about the U.S. men's national team is they are extremely young. And, when it comes to their chemistry, we'll talk a little bit about this because I had JJD-TV on to talk about Canada last week, which was a very interesting episode. You should check out. But beyond that, Canada, I felt like in CONCACAF, had the best team chemistry. I think the way they gelled with John Herdman, the way the roster just gelled all together, on the field, off the field. But I would venture to say the U.S. men's national team isn't far behind when it comes to, the relationships these players have together or they perceive to have. So why haven't we've seen that on the field? Is it because of the injuries? What's your take on that?
I think the injuries are a part of it. I think the amount of time that these players have had to spend with each other or not spend because of the injuries, that definitely has something to do with it. I think even just kind of going along with our conversation about John Brooks, having someone with the experience and knowing what it's like to walk out into a packed arena to play on the world stage in a World Cup, I think that gives a lift to the intensity and the meaningness to these games that we don't necessarily have because the team is so young. We have players like Christian Pulisic who has won the Champions League and played in the Champions League final, but I think internationally it's been a bit weird just for the team not having the time together. I will say you spoke a little bit about the Canadian piece. The US team has a good chemistry. I would even venture to say a great chemistry. And that is one of the reasons why we continue to see really important dual nationals choose this team, or players that come into camp, meet the players, meet the coaches. Like, honestly, a credit to Greg that we have been able to recruit so many important dual nationals. Yes, we've lost David Ochoa, who is not playing for Mexico. We've lost plenty of players that are not necessarily playing or at the quality that you would expect the US to have in a starting 11. I will say about Canada, though, okay, if the US has a good or great chemistry, Canada is on another level.
It's the brotherhood. I mean, it's what the John Herdman's been calling it.
Like, I genuinely think that Canadian players are ready to die for each other on the pitch.
Is that John Herdman, or do you think that's the leadership they have?
So it's absolutely a part of John Herdman's MO. If you have a chance to listen to his TED Talk about how he really generated a team identity for the Canadian women's team. So the Canadian men's coach was the Canadian women's coach before that. And yeah, if you have time, go watch his TED Talk because he discusses like how he built that identity with the women's team. Yeah. And honestly, after that talk that I was listening to, I was ready to run through a brick wall for John.
I'll have to listen to it.
Like, you don't necessarily get that feeling when you listen to Greg Berhalter talk, or even when you watch the behind the scenes. Like, yeah, it's good, it's rah-rah, it's coachy, it's the right thing, but like there's something special about the way that John Herdman builds an identity for a team. And I think Canada is fully bought in to working for him and for each other. I think the US is more bought into wanting to do well for the rest of the team. And I think, like, in a game of margins, that makes a huge difference.
it almost seems that there's a perception when you talk about Canada, you always talk about the whole. And I feel like when we talk about the U.S. men's national team, we always single out specific players. I've noticed that across the community. Now obviously, the Twitter communities don't really have much say in the locker room. But at the same time, I see Canadian fans talking about the team, talking about the brotherhood, whereas we're always singling out, who's struggling on defense, or, who should be starting, or Greg Berhalter's roster and this, and this. That distraction's not there. And I'm sure the players in a way don't feel that as well. So I think overall team chemistry will play a role in this World Cup, especially in Group B, because one thing to be said is teams like England, with the status of most of these players playing in the Euro final, Iran, we know the chemistry that squad has, and then the chemistry that the European playoff team is going to have to get through the playoffs. The U.S. is going to have to raise their level on the field and raise essentially that appetite for success. So let's talk about the Group B matchups. Let's start with Iran, because I know we both had Next Generation Football on, and I want to hear your take on this Iranian national team.
Sure. Shayan is amazing also.
Yeah.
Please go follow him. He makes amazing content, and he was a great guest talking about Iran. Personally, for me, I think this is probably the most interesting matchup. And this has nothing to do with any of the political or national identity undercurrents of Iran in the US. It's mostly because this is the last game in the group.
Yeah.
And both teams are probably going to need points to advance if they want to come in. I'm going to assume second, just because, let's put aside how we all feel about the English exceptionalism towards their national team. England is one of the favorites to win the World Cup this year. Okay, so I expect England, whether they're hard-fought games or not, they're probably going to win this group. Iran and the US.
Real quick, with you being located in London, have you had? I feel like I asked you this when I was over there. Have you had any conversations with English fans, English supporters about drawing the US in their group?
Yes, and people are very excited. I almost have to remind them to calm down a little bit, because if you'll recall, in 2010, the US was also in a group with England, and there was a famous tabloid in England that basically said "easy" as the group name, and it was England, Algeria,
Slovakia,
Slovenia,
excuse me, Slovenia, Yanks,
and then the Yanks. So we drew that match, US versus England, and then we actually topped the group. And we talked a little bit about the history of the World Cup. The US also beat England in the 1950 World Cup. So England has never beaten the US in a World Cup competition.
Exactly.
The US has the balance of those matches. I expect England, however, to win this group. And in that last match day, whether England has sealed it or not, will be a really difficult opponent for whoever wins that European playoff spot. And especially if it's a Scotland-like team. I mean, that's a really, really interesting matchup for England. So the Iran team is going to be as much like a lot of the CONCACAF teams that we faced, a team that will be really good on the counter. They have quality in spots in their teams, but for the most part, it will be the US trying to break down a lower block. That's not to say the quality isn't there, but that's how Iran plays. They play really solidly. They only win they win a lot, but they win each game by one goal. So that's going to be a really difficult game. I hope for the energy of the game that in that last match day, both teams need a result, and hopefully that opens up the game a bit, and I think would lend to an advantage to the US if Iran is needing points at that point as well. But we're going to talk about my thoughts in Group B. Honestly, it's just as likely that the US advances out of this group as we bomb out with 0 points.
I kind of agree. And one thing I want to say is, you mentioned walking out on a field and having that veteran John Brooks or an individual like that. I feel like this matchup versus Iran in the last game of the group is going to be kind of reminiscent of playing, let's just say, in El Salvador, or I think the stadium is going to be rocking especially geographically where Iran and Qatar are located, ticket sales wise, as far as a lot of Iranians coming over to Qatar to see the matches. I think it's going to be an incredible atmosphere. I think it's going to be up in the air, like you said. And Iran, just as they win games by a goal, when they do lose, they lose by a goal. They don't give up a lot of goals. And you saw that in the last World Cup. They played really well, right? So interesting to think about that. But yeah, as far as the rest of the group, let's carry on through.
Sure. So it's going to be difficult to maintain this consistency as we talk through the European playoff winner. It could look very different depending on who wins. For the story alone, I would love to see Ukraine make it through. But at the same time, as a fan of a team in that group, you kind of don't want them to be there because I would be rooting for a Ukraine story. And if I'm already thinking England is going to win the group, then I kind of have to root against Ukraine.
It's almost like written in the stars. You could have a storyline where you have Scotland, England. Well, I guess you can't because it would be Ukraine or Scotland.
Yeah.
Let's just say Ukraine qualifies. You have the fairy tale story that's written in the stars with Ukraine in the group. You have Iran versus the United States, which obviously is a massive rivalry context from the 1998 World Cup, which they still talk about is the biggest match in Iranian history for soccer, for football. And then obviously you have England throwing that in with just the context of England, USA. I think it would make for a really interesting group if Ukraine was in there, but there's almost too many storylines out there, Jake. It makes me nervous. Which one is the soccer gods going to select to follow through with?
Well, it's tough because if you look at Ukraine as a squad, they're probably the strongest squad that's left in the playoff, but they haven't really been practicing. They haven't really had any time to play. Like Dynamo Kiev is usually one of the really strong teams to get into the group stages of the Champions League, and they have a very localized personnel within their squad. There are a lot of great players that are on Ukraine, but it's so up in the air right now if they will be playing, if they can even play in this game, or if Wales can get through automatically without playing the match. Then you have Wales and Scotland to go as well. Like both of those are on the British Isles. They're part of the United Kingdom. And I can tell you right now, like if either one of those go through, that in England is probably going to be a bigger game and match than against any of the other teams in the group, including the US.
Yeah, you have, England versus Scotland's almost the battle of who invented football, right? You look back at that, that's a crazy match in itself. It's going to be electric.
Yeah. And if you don't know your geography, bring up a map of England, because on that same island is Wales in the west and Scotland in the north. It is all one connected island between Wales, England, and Scotland. So if one of those teams goes through, it's going to be nutso in England. And maybe that actually does play to the US's strength, because maybe that is a really emotional game for England that will take some of their mind off and some of their focus off the match against the US.
There's a lot of Welsh Scots, they work in England. They travel to England's large cities. And you see how it is in the UK. So it's going to be rivalries amongst families, friends, loved ones. It would be crazy either way if Wales or Scotland do qualify. So you're right about that. I'm pulling for Ukraine because I think it'd be an amazing storyline. But we'll have to see. We'll have to wait. Okay, so USA World Cup prediction. Way too early World Cup prediction, being it's in mid-May right now. It's almost kind of useless, but at the same time, it's fun to dream, to imagine. So what are your thoughts as far as, will they advance out of the group? And if they do advance out of the group, how far could you see this team going?
In this World Cup, I think realistically, I would expect the US to get 3 or 4 points in this group. If they get 4, they'll probably be vying for that second position. I think things get interesting if we advance from the group, because the way that the knockout rounds are going to work is that our group would play the top 2 teams from Group A, which is the group of life where Qatar is. So all we need to do is make it out of the group. That's a bit easier said than done. But I think realistically, like, we could probably expect the US to get 3 or 4 points, depending on how well our center backs gel together. And if we have a striker in form, that could really go a long, long way for the US's success, because we have such a good spine in our midfield three between Yunus Musa, Tyler Adams, and West McKinney, who could feature against any team in the world at this point. And all of them, again, are 23 years or younger. This team could easily get 6 points and advance out of the group. This team could also get 0 points because they're young and inconsistent. And if we don't have a goal scorer, and I don't know, Matt Turner gets injured or Zach Steffen is not in form and we don't have a center back pairing, like, all of that could easily happen. And we could just as easily get 6 points as get 0. I think realistically, we can expect to pull one out against one of the teams that aren't named England and maybe get a draw against England.
And realistically, who do you see being our goalie? Who do you see being our starting striker? I mean, if you had to put money on it.
Yeah, I mean, today, that obviously there's 5 or 6 months still, but today I would put Matt Turner in goal and I would put Jesus Ferreira at the 9. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be really interesting in this June window if we can get Haji Wright included in the team. He had another goal and another assist today.
It's fantastic
for his team in Turkey. So, and he was a huge youth prospect with the team that had
his goal ratio, his goal to appearance ratio in the youth was unbelievable. I was looking back at it, and he dropped off a little bit, but now he's resurging. He's 23 too, I believe, right?
Yeah,
right around
and for people that don't know, Haji Wright was at Schalke when Schalke and BVB, Dortmund, and some of the other German teams came to scout Haji Wright. They actually saw Christian Pulisic. That's why they were able to scout Christian Pulisic. So yes, Haji Wright has been a prospect for a long time. If he was a late bloomer, it's ridiculous that we're saying 23 is a late bloomer, but that's where we are with the US team. That's how young we are. I think if Haji Wright or Jesus Ferreira is leading the Golden Boot race right now in the MLS, I think he has 9 goals in 11 matches, something like that. 9 goals. I don't know how many matches they played. But yeah, we have some options. Matt Turner, Jesus Ferreira for me are goalkeeper and number 9.
Yeah, and for context, to anyone out there, a 23-year-old Clint Dempsey was still playing for the New England Revolution, and if we look back,
fresh out of college,
right? Even a guy like a Brian McBride, let's just say someone like that. I don't even think he made the jump to Europe until he was like 30, I believe. So, just some past strikers. But anyway, let's talk about your channel. Let's talk about what you do, because that's sure. I'm a huge fan of FIFAmerica. I'm a huge fan of Jake. Awesome channel. Talk about where they can find you.
Sure. Yeah. So my channel is FIFAmerica. I am on Twitter at AmericanFIF. I am currently living in London. I have some of my US Soccer Federation coaching licenses and some English Football Association coaching licenses. I'm currently working towards my UEFA B license. So on my channel, I like to break down a lot of the players for the US or coaching strategies. Just trying to have like a bit more of an analytical deep dive into it. I think there's a lot of people that can talk about the US national team and are good at it. So really just trying to find some value in being able to bring some of that deeper dives into the USMNT community.
Yeah. So for anyone who's tuning in who is not a US men's national team fan but is interested in hearing more about the US, if this kind of piqued your interest, he's a great guy to subscribe to learn more about specific players and areas of tactical analysis. So Jake, it's been great having you on the channel.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So with that, guys, stay tuned for next week. We finished up here with Group B, so we'll see who we bring on next. I have a couple guests in the works. And as always, stay tuned for the next episode. Because we're profiling the US, I'll say, go USMNT. Take care, guys.